The coldest betrayal does not happen in the shadows. It happens right in front of your eyes, dealt by the man who swore to protect you. Standing frozen on that desolate mountain pass, the freezing rain lashing my face, I thought my life was over. Instead, it was a baptism. He abandoned me, thinking I was just a naive, helpless wife. He had no idea his cruelty had just awakened a 20-year-old ghost thirsty for revenge. Hello, wonderful listeners of Zoe Revenge Stories. Our channel was recently demonetized by YouTube, leaving us without the budget to keep operating and producing the content you love. If you enjoyed today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so our dedicated team can cover their living expenses and continue creating these videos for you. You can donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or by clicking the PayPal link in the description or the comment section below. My name is Harper Hayes. I am 29 years old, and my nightmare began on the unforgiving asphalt of Snoqualmie Pass. The freezing rain did not merely fall. It attacked. It drove down in relentless, diagonal sheets, mixed with sharp shards of ice that sliced across my cheeks like tiny razors. I was standing in the pitch black of the Washington Mountains, clutching my 2-month-old son, Leo, tight against my chest. Just seconds before, the world had been safe and warm. We were secured in the heated leather seats of our family car, heading home from what was supposed to be a quiet weekend getaway. Then, without warning, Julian pulled over to the narrow, muddy shoulder of the pass. He reached over and unbuckled my seatbelt. Before my mind could even process his sudden, violent movements, he shoved me hard out into the raging storm. My boots slipped on the freezing slush, and I fell heavily onto my knees, desperately twisting my body to ensure Leo did not take the impact of the fall. I scrambled up, gasping as the freezing air punched the breath straight out of my lungs. I reached for the door handle, but the heavy mechanical clunk of the locks echoed over the howling wind. I slammed my bare hands against the thick, cold glass. Julian was right there, mere inches away. My phone, my purse, my entire life sat safely on the passenger seat beside him. I screamed his name, begging him to open the door, begging him to look at his infant son crying in the bitter cold. Julian slowly turned his head. The dashboard lights cast a sickly pale green glow across his face. I will never forget that look for as long as I live. There was no anger, no panic, and absolutely no remorse. His eyes were completely dead, cold and sharp as the black ice falling around me. He looked at me as if I were a piece of trash he had finally managed to discard. Without uttering a single word, he shifted the gear, slammed his heavy foot on the gas pedal, and the car roared to life. The tires spun aggressively, kicking up a wave of freezing mud that splashed across my legs. I watched the red glow of his taillights fade into the swallowing darkness of the mountain pass, until there was nothing left but the black night and the screaming wind. Panic, pure and suffocating, seized my throat, but then Leo wailed, a thin, fragile sound that cut straight through my terror. The motherly instinct, primal and fierce, immediately overrode the panic. I unzipped my soaked winter coat and tucked Leo inside, pressing his tiny, fragile body directly against my bare skin to share my core body heat. I wrapped both my arms tightly around my chest, hunching my shoulders to form a human shield against the brutal wind. I started walking. There was no shelter, no light, no signs of civilization anywhere in sight. There was just the endless, muddy shoulder of the highway winding through the towering, invisible pine trees. My legs quickly went numb. Every single step was an agonizing battle against the thick slush and the biting wind. The cold seeped deeply through my clothes, biting into my very bones. I kept whispering to Leo, promising him we would make it, even as my own vision began to blur from the freezing pain. I did not know how many minutes or hours passed in that darkness. Time froze entirely, turning into a singular, agonizing loop of putting one freezing foot in front of the other just to survive. Then, a pair of brilliant headlights pierced the darkness behind me. At first, I felt a massive jolt of terror. thinking Julian had returned to finish the job he started. But the lights were too high, too blindingly bright. A massive black armored SUV roared through the storm and hit the brakes directly behind me. The heavy tactical tires gripped the icy asphalt, bringing the absolute beast of a vehicle to a sudden, screeching halt. I stumbled backward, hugging Leo tighter, ready to run directly into the freezing woods if I had to. The heavy driver's side door swung open. A man stepped out into the blinding wash of the headlights. He was older, perhaps in his late 50s, wearing a rugged military-style tactical jacket. He did not rush toward me. He froze in his tracks. He did not ask if I was okay. He did not ask what a woman was doing out in a deadly blizzard with a newborn baby. Instead, his eyes dropped instantly to my hands. In my desperate attempt to hold my heavy coat closed around Leo, my sleeve had ridden up, exposing my left wrist to the harsh light. His gaze was entirely fixated on the strange, crescent moon birthmark etched deeply onto my skin. The rugged, hardened man suddenly looked as though he had seen a ghost. The heavy sleet battered his weathered face, but he did not even blink. When he finally spoke, his voice broke through the howling wind. It was trembling, cracked, and heavy with a raw, overwhelming emotion. "Finally found you," he whispered, stepping closer, his eyes welling with tears that immediately mixed with the freezing rain. "I have looked for you for 20 years. Before I could even process the absolute impossibility of his words, he moved with practiced urgency. He placed a strong, warm hand on my shivering shoulder, quickly guiding me and my precious son away from the frozen hell and into the intense, saving heat of the armored car. The heavy steel door of the cabin slammed shut, severing the howling storm outside like a clean knife cut. The sudden silence in the room was deafening, heavy and thick. The man who called himself Arthur Vance threw the deadbolts. There were 4 of them, each locking into place with a loud, industrial thud that echoed against the thick log walls. This was no ordinary mountain retreat. The windows were small, reinforced with dark steel grates, and the walls felt unnaturally solid, built to withstand a siege. But inside, it was a sanctuary. A massive stone fireplace dominated the main room, already roaring with thick logs that radiated a deep, saving heat. Arthur moved quickly, his actions precise and practiced. Without saying a word, he brought out thick wool blankets, warm towels, and an emergency medical kit. He even had infant formula and sterilized bottles waiting in the small, Spartan kitchen. I focused entirely on Leo. I stripped away his damp clothes, wrapping him securely in the heated blankets. I fed him the warm milk Arthur prepared. Slowly, the terrifying blue tint faded from my son's tiny lips, replaced by a healthy, flush pink. His breathing steadied into a soft, rhythmic hum. I laid him down in a makeshift crib near the hearth, watching his chest rise and fall. Only then, when I knew my baby was truly safe, did the adrenaline begin to drain from my veins, leaving behind a hollow, trembling exhaustion. I turned around. Arthur was sitting at the heavy oak dining table across the room. He was holding a mug of steaming black coffee, his sharp eyes studying me intently. The flickering firelight cast deep shadows across his weathered face. The air between us was tense, heavy with unasked questions and buried histories. "My name is Arthur Vance," he said, his voice low, gravelly, and careful. "Drink this. You need to raise your core temperature." He pushed a second mug toward the empty wooden chair opposite him. I walked over slowly, my legs still heavy, and sat down. The heat of the mug burned my palms, but the warmth could not reach the icy dread sitting in the pit of my stomach. "You said you have been looking for me for 20 years, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I kept my eyes locked on his face, searching for any sign of madness or deception. "Who are you?" Arthur took a slow breath, setting his mug down. He looked at my left wrist, at the crescent moon birthmark that had somehow stopped him in his tracks on that frozen highway. "I am a ghost," Arthur replied softly. "Just like your father. I was his closest associate, his partner. and his only trusted friend. My breath caught in my throat. My father, a man I had never known, a man who, according to the orphanage directors, had simply walked away one night and never looked back. My father abandoned me, I stated flatly, the old, familiar bitterness rising in my chest. He left me at St. Mary's when I was a toddler. He never cared. "Do not ever say that," Arthur interrupted, his voice suddenly fierce, flashing with a protective anger that startled me. "Your father, David, was a brilliant cybersecurity engineer, a visionary. He did not abandon you. Harper, he sacrificed his entire existence for you." Arthur leaned forward, folding his large hands together. The tension in the room grew thicker, pressing against my lungs. 20 years ago, your father discovered something he was not supposed to. Arthur explained, his tone steady, measuring every word. He was working for an underground technology syndicate, a shadow corporation that dealt in weaponized data. When he realized what they were planning, he wrote a countermeasure, a core algorithm designed to dismantle their entire operation. But they found out. They sent hunters after him. They threatened to take you. I stared at him, my mind struggling to process the impossible weight of his words. He had to fake his own death. Arthur continued, his eyes locked onto mine. He had to cut every single tie to his past, including me, and especially you. Leaving you at that orphanage was the hardest thing he ever did. It was the only way to ensure you remained invisible, the only way to keep you breathing. I have spent the last 2 decades tracking phantom signals, trying to find where he hid you, just to make sure you were safe. A profound, suffocating silence filled the cabin. The crackling of the fire was the only sound. For 20 years, I had built my entire identity around being unwanted, a discarded child. Now, this stranger was telling me I was the center of a desperate, loving sacrifice. "If I was hidden," I whispered, my voice trembling, "then why did Julian try to kill me tonight?" Arthur's expression darkened. The sympathy vanished, replaced by a cold, tactical hardness. He reached down beside his chair and lifted a thick, heavy manila folder, dropping it onto the center of the wooden table. It hit the surface with a loud, heavy smack. "Because you are not invisible anymore," Arthur said. "And Julian did not try to kill you tonight out of anger. It was a scheduled execution." I shook my head, instinctively backing away from the table. No. Julian and I had a fight. He snapped. He lost his temper. We met at a coffee shop 3 years ago. It was an accident." "Nothing about your marriage was an accident," Arthur said ruthlessly. He flipped the folder open. Dozens of photographs, financial records, and encrypted communication logs spilled across the table. I stared down at them. There was a photo of me walking into my university library, dated 3 years ago, a photo of me at the grocery store, a detailed map of my daily routine. "Look at the dates," Arthur commanded. "He was tracking you for 6 months before you ever bumped into him at that cafe. He profiled you. He learned your habits, your vulnerabilities, your desperate desire for a stable family. He built a perfect psychological trap, and he walked you right into a marriage." My hands began to shake violently. I reached out and picked up a document. It was a background check on me, commissioned by an offshore holding company, signed by Julian. My eyes scanned the cruel, clinical assessments of my personality. Subject is isolated. Subject craves affection. Subject will be easily manipulated. "Why?" The word tore from my throat, raw and agonizing. "I have no money. I have nothing. Why would he dedicate 3 years of his life to faking a marriage with me?" "Because of your father's algorithm," Arthur said, tapping a heavy finger against a legal document at the bottom of the pile. "Your father was paranoid, but he was smart. He locked the algorithm inside a highly encrypted, automated trust. It is designed to legally transfer sole ownership and access keys to your father's only living heir when she reaches full maturity, when you turn 30. My blood ran completely cold. I am turning 30 at the end of this month. "Julian works for the remnants of the very syndicate that hunted your father," Arthur explained. his voice devoid of any warmth. "They finally tracked down your bloodline. Julian was sent in to secure the asset. By marrying you, he positioned himself perfectly, and tonight, he executed the final phase. If you die of accidental hypothermia in a tragic winter storm, leaving behind a newborn son, Julian becomes the grieving widower. More importantly, as Leo's sole surviving parent and legal guardian, Julian gains complete, unchallenged legal control over your estate. He gets the algorithm." I dropped the papers. They fluttered back down to the table, landing over the photographs of the man I thought I loved. My mind fractured. Every gentle kiss, every whispered promise in the dark, the tears of joy he shed when Leo was born, all of it was a calculated performance, a 3-year-long stage play directed by a monster waiting for the exact moment to slaughter me. He had held my body. He had created a child with me, all while counting down the days until he could throw me into the freezing snow to die. I closed my eyes. I expected a tidal wave of hysterical tears. I expected to scream, to collapse onto the floor, to shatter into a million irreparable pieces. But the tears did not come. Instead, something else happened. The overwhelming, crushing agony of the betrayal suddenly hit a ceiling and froze over. The panic and the heartbreak condensed, hardening into something dark, sharp, and incredibly dense. A heavy, absolute stillness washed over my mind. I opened my eyes and looked at Arthur. The room no longer felt warm. The fire in the hearth looked dull and weak compared to the cold, calculating rage now igniting in my chest. Julian thought I was a naive, desperate orphan who would simply curl up in the snow and fade away quietly. He thought he had already won. "He thinks I am dead," I said. My voice did not shake. It was smooth, flat, and entirely unrecognizable to my own ears. "He will wait 48 hours to file a missing persons report," Arthur confirmed, watching me carefully, recognizing the dangerous shift in my demeanor. "He needs to play the part of the panicked husband perfectly." I turned my head to look at the makeshift crib, watching my beautiful, innocent son sleeping peacefully in the shadows. He was the only real thing to come out of this nightmare, and Julian had been perfectly willing to let him freeze to death on that highway just to seal the deal. I looked back at the documents scattered across the table, at the face of the man who had destroyed my entire reality. "Arthur," I said softly, the silence in the room wrapping around my words like a tightened wire. "Teach me everything you know. We are going to destroy his entire world." The morning sun did not bring warmth. It only brought clarity. I sat in front of a massive bank of glowing monitors in Arthur's underground communications room. The weeping, terrified girl who had been thrown into the snow was gone, shed like dead skin. In her place sat a woman operating with absolute, mechanical precision. Arthur had connected us to his secured intelligence network. It was an invisible web of proxy servers and decryption engines running quietly beneath the surface of the internet. Julian had always kept his devices locked behind biometric scanners and complex passwords. He used to laugh and tell me not to touch his laptop, claiming my lack of technical skills might accidentally delete his important financial portfolios. He genuinely believed I was digitally blind. He was wrong. He forgot whose blood ran in my veins. With Arthur guiding my hands over the mechanical keyboard, I bypassed Julian's two-factor authentication in less than 20 minutes. We did not just hack his phone, we cracked open the entire mirrored backup of his encrypted cloud drive. Terabytes of his hidden life spilled across the screens. "Start filtering by corporate domains," Arthur instructed, his eyes scanning the rapid flow of data. "Look for the financial anchors." My fingers flew across the keys. I cross-referenced his hidden bank accounts with his travel logs. Within an hour, the scattered pieces snapped together to form a terrifying picture. Julian was not an independent investment banker. His entire career was a fabricated front. The paychecks filtering into his offshore accounts all originated from a single, heavily shielded source, Ethelgard Dynamics. Ethelgard. The name tasted like ash in my mouth. It was the exact corporate shell that had swallowed the underground syndicate 20 years ago. The very people who had hunted my father down and forced him to erase his own existence. I opened a hidden directory labeled Project Origin. Inside, I found an archived communication log spanning the last 3 years. It was a direct, encrypted messaging thread between Julian and the chief executive officer of Ethelgard, a woman named Victoria Sterling. Reading their messages was like reading the autopsy report of my own life. "Pull up the transcript from last week," Arthur said, pointing a heavy finger at the top right monitor. I opened the file. The words glowed in harsh white text against the black screen. Julian wrote, "The target reaches full maturity in 14 days. The automated trust will transfer the core keys on her 30th birthday. I am executing the extraction protocol this weekend." Victoria replied, "Ensure there is no collateral damage linking back to the firm. Natural causes only. Hypothermia leaves no forensic evidence of a struggle. The infant must survive. You need the child to establish your status as the sole legal guardian to claim the estate." Julian responded, "Understood. The Mountain Pass forecast shows a severe blizzard hitting at 2200 hours. Visibility will be 0. I will drop them on the eastern ridge. She will not survive the night. I will wait the standard 48 hours before notifying local authorities to ensure I am cleared of any suspicion." I leaned back in the heavy leather chair, staring at the glowing letters. There it was, the absolute, undeniable proof. The fight in the car had not been a sudden flare of marital tension. It was a meticulously choreographed execution. Julian had checked the weather, selected the exact mile marker, and calculated the freezing time of a human body, all while humming along to the radio with his wife and newborn son in the back seat. Right now, he was likely sitting in our living room. He was probably drinking his morning espresso, watching the news, simply waiting for the clock to strike that 48-hour mark. He was waiting for his cue to walk into a police station, bury his face in his hands, and weep for his missing family. "We can send this to the Federal Bureau of Investigation right now," Arthur said quietly, breaking the silence. "This is enough to put him away for conspiracy to commit murder. We can dismantle Ethelgard's leadership." I stared at the screen. If I went to the police, Julian would go to prison. But Ethelgard was a multi-billion-dollar entity. They had armies of corporate lawyers. They would distance themselves from him, bury the evidence in endless litigation, and continue hunting for my father's algorithm. Putting Julian behind bars was not enough, not even close. "No," I replied, my voice steady and devoid of any hesitation. "If we just arrest him, he only loses his freedom. I want him to lose his mind. I want Ethelgard to burn from the inside out." Arthur raised an eyebrow, a flicker of genuine respect crossing his hardened features. "What are you suggesting?" I closed the encrypted files and turned to face him. The plan forming in my mind was cold, calculated, and incredibly dangerous. "Julian needs the grieving husband routine to get the algorithm," I said, a dark, humorless smile touching the corners of my mouth. "He expects me to be a frozen corpse in the woods. So, I am going to disappoint him. I am going to walk right back into his arms." Arthur leaned forward, his expression tightening. "Harper, going back into that house is suicide. You are stepping back into the cage with the predator." "I am not the prey anymore, Arthur," I stated firmly. "He spent 3 years lying to me. Now, I am going to show him what a real performance looks like. I will go back. I will play the traumatized, forgiving wife, and I will hand him the exact digital key he has been slaughtering people to find." I stood up from the console, the heavy weight of vengeance settling comfortably onto my shoulders. I was going to give Julian exactly what he wanted, but I would make absolutely sure it was the very poison that destroyed him. The harsh fluorescent lights of the local police precinct buzzed aggressively overhead. I walked through the double-glass doors just as the morning shift was settling in. My clothes were intentionally torn, my boots caked in dried mud, and I had spent the last hour practicing the frantic, exhausted tremor in my hands until it became second nature. When the desk sergeant looked up and saw me clutching Leo tightly against my chest, he immediately jumped out of his chair. I fed the police a carefully constructed, flawless lie. I told them Julian and I had a terrible argument, that I had demanded to get out of the car in a fit of rage, and he had driven off to cool down, not realizing the blizzard was about to hit. I claimed I had stumbled upon an abandoned logging shed in the woods and huddled there with my baby to survive the freezing night. I painted myself as the foolish, emotional wife. I made absolutely no mention of Arthur, the armored vehicle, or the hidden cabin. Exactly 20 minutes after the police made the call, Julian burst through the precinct doors. If I had not seen his encrypted messages, I would have believed his performance. It was a masterpiece of manipulation. He sprinted across the lobby, his face pale and contorted in agony, and collapsed onto his knees right in front of me. He wrapped his arms around my waist, burying his face into my dirty coat, sobbing so violently his entire body shook. He wailed about the crushing stress of his job, claiming he had suffered a temporary mental breakdown and had driven back an hour later only to find me completely gone in the snow. He begged for my forgiveness, kissing my frozen hands, playing the utterly destroyed, remorseful husband. I looked down at the man who had coldly calculated the exact time it would take for my heart to stop beating in the snow. Bile rose in my throat, but I swallowed it down. I reached out, gently stroking his hair, and let a few pathetic tears slip down my own cheeks. "It is okay, Julian," I whispered, my voice trembling with practiced weakness. "I am here. We are safe. I know you would never hurt us on purpose." I wrapped my arms around his neck, resting my chin on his shoulder. The velvet wrapped perfectly around the blade. I surrendered to his embrace, playing the obedient, utterly dependent wife to absolute perfection, while my eyes remained completely dry and dead behind his back. Going back to our house was the most agonizing psychological test of my life. Walking through the front door, smelling his expensive cologne, and seeing our framed wedding photos on the wall made my skin crawl. But I maintained the facade. I took a hot shower, fed Leo, and acted as though the near-death experience had simply frightened me into loving my husband even more. That night, Julian took a heavy sleeping pill, claiming his nerves were completely shot from the panic of losing me. The moment his breathing deepened into a heavy, drug-induced snore, I slipped out of bed. I moved silently into his home office. Arthur had given me a microdrive no larger than a fingernail. I slid it into the hidden port at the back of Julian's primary workstation. The screen flickered to life. I bypassed his biometric locks using the master codes Arthur and I had cracked the day before. Within 10 minutes, I had installed 3 invisible backdoors deep inside Julian's operating system. Arthur now had unrestricted, permanent access to every keystroke, every file, and every communication Julian sent to Ethelgard Dynamics. The next morning, it was time to set the final trap. I went up to the attic and retrieved a small, dusty wooden music box I had kept since my days at the orphanage. With a heavy screwdriver, I pried open the false bottom we had constructed. Inside rested a sleek metallic digital key, a highly encrypted USB drive that Arthur had prepared specifically for this moment. I walked downstairs into the kitchen. Holding the small device, Julian was sipping his black coffee, dressed in a sharp Italian suit, preparing to head into the city. I approached him hesitantly, biting my lower lip, acting confused and slightly overwhelmed. "Julian," I said softly, placing the metal drive onto the marble counter. "I was looking through some of my old things from the orphanage this morning. I found this taped inside the lining of my old music box. There was a note attached with my father's handwriting. It said it was important." Julian froze, his eyes locked onto the drive. I could practically see the greedy, violent gears turning furiously behind his eyes. I plugged it into my laptop, but it just asked for a bunch of passwords and showed weird lines of code. I continued, letting out a frustrated, innocent sigh. "You know I do not understand technology at all. It gives me a headache. Could you take it to your office and figure out what it is? Maybe my dad left some old family photos on it." Julian reached out, his fingers trembling ever so slightly as he picked up the drive. He looked at me, a sickeningly sweet smile spreading across his face. He thought he had won. He thought his 3 years of torture and manipulation had finally paid off, and the ignorant, foolish girl had just willingly handed him the keys to the kingdom. "Of course, sweetheart," he said, slipping the drive into his breast pocket, patting it gently. "I will have my IT team look at it today. Do not worry your pretty head about it." He kissed my forehead, grabbed his briefcase, and walked out the front door. He was heading straight to Ethelgard Dynamics for their emergency board meeting, ready to launch their new artificial intelligence system. He walked to his car with the swagger of a man who believed he was about to become a billionaire by sunset. I stood by the window, watching his car pull out of the driveway and disappear down the street. The moment he was out of sight, the weak, confused expression dropped from my face like a heavy iron curtain. I turned around and walked upstairs. I pulled 2 large suitcases from the closet. I moved methodically from room to room, packing every single piece of clothing, every document, and every toy that belonged to me and Leo. I scrubbed the bathroom counters, cleared out the nursery, and took down the framed photographs. I erased every physical trace that my son and I had ever existed within those walls. I was not just leaving him, I was preparing the ground for his total, catastrophic destruction. The blade was in his hands, and he did not even realize he was already bleeding. The glass elevators at Ethelgard Dynamics moved silently, shooting up 60 floors into the Seattle skyline. I stood in the center car, flanked by 4 of the most ruthless, high-priced corporate litigators Arthur could buy. I was no longer wearing the cheap, practical clothes of a stay-at-home mother. I wore a tailored black suit, my posture violently straight, my eyes fixed perfectly on the glowing numbers changing above the door. At exactly 10 in the morning, the elevator chimed. We stepped out onto the executive floor. Beyond the heavy mahogany doors of the main boardroom, Ethelgard's board of directors was gathered to sign a contract worth over $2 billion. Julian had given them the digital key, and they were finalizing the integration of the algorithm into their global artificial intelligence network. I did not knock. I placed my hands on the brass handles and shoved the doors violently open. The room fell dead silent. 15 billionaires in custom suits turned to stare at the intrusion. Julian was standing at the head of the massive obsidian table, a laser pointer in his hand and a smug, victorious grin frozen on his face. When his eyes locked onto mine, the color drained completely from his skin. "Harper," Julian gasped, his voice cracking, completely forgetting where he was. "What are you doing here?" "I am saving this board from a catastrophic federal indictment," I said, my voice echoing off the glass walls. I did not look at him like a wife. I looked at him like an insect. I nodded to my lead attorney. He unlatched his leather briefcase and tossed a thick stack of certified legal documents directly onto the center of the table. They hit the glass with a loud smack. "Gentlemen and Ms. Sterling," my lawyer announced, his voice booming with absolute authority. "My client, Harper Hayes, is the sole proprietor of a holding company established 48 hours ago. Attached are the federal copyright patents and encrypted timestamps proving she is the exclusive legal owner of the exact source code Mr. Julian Hayes just uploaded to your proprietary servers." Whispers erupted around the table. Victoria Sterling, the chief executive officer, stood up, her face twisting in sudden panic. "That is impossible," Julian stammered, stepping backward, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She does not know anything about coding. She found that drive in a dusty wooden box." "You really should have asked for the password." "Julian," I said smoothly, stepping forward, claiming the space. "By bringing that drive into this building and integrating it into Ethelgard's servers, you did not secure a promotion. You committed grand larceny, intellectual property theft, and federal economic espionage. And because Ethelgard Dynamics accepted stolen assets, every single person sitting at this table is now an accessory to a federal crime." The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Victoria Sterling looked at Julian as if he were a live grenade. "It gets much worse," I continued, turning my gaze directly to Victoria. "Arthur, send it." At that exact second, every single cellular phone, tablet, and laptop sitting on that massive conference table chimed simultaneously. "Check your inboxes," I commanded. The executives scrambled for their devices. Victoria opened hers, her eyes widening in sheer, unadulterated terror. Arthur had just broadcasted the entire decrypted chat log between Julian and Victoria to the entire board, along with the tracking data, the weather reports, and the search histories proving Julian had meticulously planned to murder me and my infant son in a freezing blizzard. I have just forwarded those exact same files to the Cyber Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, my lawyer added casually, checking his gold watch. They dispatched heavily armed field agents from the Seattle field office 10 minutes ago. They are currently pulling into your underground parking garage. Total chaos erupted. The board members began shouting, scrambling away from the table. Victoria Sterling, a woman who had built an empire on shadows and blood, realized instantly that her ship was sinking. She looked at Julian, her eyes completely devoid of mercy. "Security!" Victoria screamed into the intercom on the table. "Detain Julian Hayes immediately. Revoke his clearance. Confiscate his devices." "Victoria, wait," Julian pleaded, holding his hands up, taking a desperate step toward her. "I got you the code. I did exactly what you asked." "I have absolutely no idea who you are," Victoria spat back, already dialing her own defense attorneys. "You are a rogue employee who stole classified data and attempted domestic homicide. You are entirely on your own." Two massive security guards burst through the boardroom doors, grabbing Julian by his arms and dragging him backward. The smug, untouchable investment banker was gone. In his place was a pathetic, terrified coward. I turned on my heel and walked out of the boardroom, letting my lawyers handle the screaming executives. The security guards dragged Julian toward the glass elevators in the main lobby, throwing him roughly onto the polished marble floor to wait for the federal agents. I walked into the massive, echoing lobby, my heels clicking sharply against the stone. Julian was on his knees. His expensive Italian tie was ripped. His hair was a messy disaster, and pathetic tears were streaming down his face. When he saw me, he lunged forward, grabbing the hem of my coat. "Harper, please," he sobbed, his voice high-pitched and completely broken. "Please, sweetheart, I am sorry. They forced me to do it. They made me. I love you. I love Leo. Please, do not take my life away. Do not let them lock me up. I am your husband." I stopped. I looked down at his trembling form. I thought about the biting wind on the mountain pass. I thought about the way he had locked the car door, looking at me with dead eyes while our son cried in the freezing darkness. I reached down and slowly pried his sweaty fingers off my coat, one by one. "You died in the snow 3 nights ago," I said, my voice as cold and hollow as a grave. "I am just burying the corpse." I did not wait for his response. I stepped gracefully over his kneeling body and walked directly toward the glass exit doors, leaving him weeping alone on the floor as the heavy tactical boots of federal agents swarmed into the lobby behind me. As the federal agents hoisted Julian to his feet, pulling his arms violently behind his back to clasp the heavy steel handcuffs around his wrists, he began to thrash. His panic morphed into a manic, desperate delusion. "You are making a massive mistake," Julian screamed, his voice cracking as he struggled against the agents. "Harper, you stupid girl, do you have any idea what you just gave them? That algorithm is a gold mine? It is worth billions of dollars. I am still going to be rich. They need me." I stopped right at the edge of the glass exit doors. I slowly turned around, looking at the pathetic, ranting man who had once shared my bed. "Julian," I said, projecting my voice so every agent and executive in the lobby could hear the final nail being driven into his coffin. "Did you honestly believe a genius who sacrificed his entire life to stop a shadow syndicate would just leave behind a convenient upgrade for them to find that drive was never an artificial intelligence core?" Julian froze, the color draining from his face yet again. "It was a Trojan horse," I stated, my words precise and lethal. "A digital death virus my father coded 20 years ago, the exact second you plugged that drive into Ethelgard's master server to show off to your bosses. You did not grant them access. You initiated a total system wipe. You just permanently deleted over 2 decades of their black market research, wiped their offshore accounts, and burned their entire global network to the ground. You did not secure an empire today. Julian, you completely destroyed it. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His knees buckled, and he let out a hollow, agonizing scream as the agents dragged his limp, defeated body out the side doors. I walked out into the crisp morning air, breathing freely for the first time in 3 years. When I returned to the hidden cabin in the woods, the heavy steel door was unlocked. The glowing monitors in the communication room were powered down. The war was officially over. Arthur was standing near the stone fireplace, gently rocking Leo in his arms. He looked exhausted, yet deeply at peace. I walked toward him to take my son. As Arthur reached out to hand Leo over, his heavy tactical jacket shifted. He had taken off his thick gloves and rolled up his sleeves. My breath caught sharply in my throat. There, on the inside of his left wrist, was a mark. It was faded, heavily scarred, and worn down by time. But the shape was absolutely undeniable. It was a crescent moon. It was an exact mirror replica of the birthmark on my own wrist. I stumbled backward, dropping my purse. I looked from the mark up to his weathered, unfamiliar face. "Arthur," I whispered, my voice trembling wildly. "What is that?" He looked down at his wrist, then back up at me. His tough military exterior completely melted away, leaving behind a profound, agonizing vulnerability. "When I realized they would never stop hunting me," he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "I knew I could not just disappear. I had to cease to exist. I underwent complete facial reconstruction surgery. I had my vocal cords medically altered, so even the voice recognition software could not track me. I became Arthur Vance so that David Hayes could die, and his beautiful daughter could live. The world spun around me, this man, this stranger who had pulled me from the freezing snow. "You," I choked out, the tears finally breaking through my cold facade. "You are my father." He nodded slowly, tears spilling over his scarred cheeks. "I had to stay away. Harper, it was pure agony, watching you grow up from the shadows, never being able to hold you or tell you how proud I was. I was supposed to stay hidden until I finished dismantling their final network node. But that night, on the mountain pass, when I saw that monster push you and my grandson into the freezing rain, the protocols no longer mattered. I broke every rule I had. I could not lose you again. There was no anger in my heart. There was no resentment for the 20 years I spent in the orphanage. There was only a massive, overwhelming wave of understanding and pure love. The greatest revenge I achieved today was not destroying the man who broke me. It was finding the man who had always loved me. I closed the distance between us and threw my arms around his neck, holding him and my son tightly in the first real embrace of my entire life. Months later, the cold Washington storms were nothing but a distant memory. I stood on a sun-drenched beach on the West Coast, the warm sand soft beneath my bare feet. The ocean breeze was gentle and healing. I watched my father walking along the shoreline, smiling brightly as he held little Leo up to look at the crashing waves. I took a deep breath, feeling the warm sun on my face. The dark past was finally closed. No corporate syndicate, no freezing rain, and no ghosts could ever touch us again. We were safe, and for the first time in my life, I was truly home. To all the wonderful listeners of Zoe Revenge Stories, thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please let me know your city and country in the comments below. As you know, our channel has lost its monetization, and we rely entirely on your kindness to keep going. If you enjoyed my story today, please consider helping us with just a $1 donation. You can easily scan the PayPal QR code on your screen or click the PayPal link in the description or the pinned comment. Your support allows us to pay our dedicated team, helping them feed their families and continue creating these thrilling stories for you. Thank you for listening, and stay safe.